Hi, in this video I'd like to discuss Abraham Lincoln and his argument against an implied right of succession and how that shows how he put extroverted thinking above introverted thinking to the point of practically ignoring introverted thinking. So originally I was going to just use ChatGPT to find a speech and then read it off, but I realized that what it did that the thing that ChatGPT made is actually probably more useful for what I want to do than actually reading off a speech would be. So let's just start with these. Let's just start reading off the arguments now. So the quote that kind of prompted me to make this video is this one. It is safe to assert that no government proper ever had a provision in its organic law for its own termination. Like, if you think about what this our argument is doing, it's practically ignoring the question of what the Constitution actually says and just substituting that for practicalities about how a Constitution should work, or how it's obvious that a Constitution should work if it's meant to preserve itself in a practical sense. He isn't making any argument from the text of the Constitution, and he also is ignoring the fact that James Madison, who wrote the Constitution, was not a very practical person. He was a dude who thought that the government didn't need a military until the War of 1812, when he basically had to have one made up practically out of scratch. So here's another set of arguments he made. He made in his message to Congress. He argued that majority rule is meaningless if any minority can just sort of veto the whole process by leaving, and sort of argued that you can't. This is basically all an argument that you can't practically have an electoral system without if any minority can just leave whenever they want, because they can effectively just veto the whole thing and make the whole idea that we're having an election pointless. Again, it's all practical arguments that aren't necessarily as rooted in theory or any sense of you have to, or even really almost in paying attention to the Constitution itself at all. So continuing on, he does things like he refuses to sort of concede these next couple are just him refusing to concede that the constitutionality of the government. It's clear, like, he gets the theory enough to get that he can't really, that if he concedes things such as the Confederacy being a nation, or concedes that, or refers to it as secession or withdrawal instead of insurrection, he gets that sort of destroys this whole argument. So he has enough introverted thinking to not fail fully on that account. And some of his later arguments are phrased in a bit more TI-ish of a way, but they're still kind of just a TI-ish dressing on top of his old arguments, like this one. The secessionists insist that our Constitution admits of secession. They have assumed to make a national constitution null by the action of a single state. This sort of, like, you can see how in this argument he is basically making the same argument that he made up here, except he's dressing in a bit more abstract of a way of doing it so that it sounds more philosophical, but he's kind of just assuming his more TE-ish way of thinking, and just kind of dressing up a bit more TI-ish too, because that's how he needs to make the argument, because it's more convincing that way. Here in the Gettysburg Address, he's able to dress up the argument in flowery, nice language, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. However, that's kind of not an argument unless you presuppose a bunch of the arguments he's already made, because about why minorities can't leave because it effectively destroys the whole thing. And the last argument here almost isn't worth addressing, because he just refers to it as a war instead of referring to it as secession. As we've established, he's refusing to use that word because it implies certain things. So you can see from all of this that throughout the war, he's starting out very openly practical and making kind of not very convincing theoretical arguments, but being pretty nakedly practical in how he views things. Throughout the war, he starts to get more theoretical in how he frames things, presumably because he's picking up on the fact that other people are demanding very theoretical framings that he doesn't really want to provide, but he's willing to because that's what is demanded of him. And in this case, it's basically practical to be theoretical, because some people are only going to be convinced by theoretical arguments, presumably quite TI-ish people. And I guess ultimately, kind of what prompted this video is that I'm kind of one of those very TI-ish people for who this describes, because when I was taking a Civil War history class and got this argument and was told that it was brilliant, got basically this argument and was told that it was brilliant and that it sort of shows Lincoln's logic. Well, I didn't say anything. My thought process was, this doesn't prove anything about what the Constitution says. So this is just kind of showing how it's just an example of just TI and TE coming into conflict, because Lincoln's clearly thinking in a very TE-ish way and not really putting much value in TI, but still has enough understanding of it to frame it in the way that he wants, which is consistent with it being an ignoring function. And yeah, so this all is consistent with the ESTJ typing that we have on him.